the king has not spent a night there. And I don't think the king is going to make that his permanent home.
Well, if you think by the time it's finally finished in about 5 years' time and, you know, Camilla's past 80, are they really going to want to up sticks from Clarence House?
Welcome back to the Royals with me, Roya, and you, Kate.
So, Roya, you've been in another palace this week.
I get around.
Tell us all about it, because Buckingham Palace East Wing has finally opened its doors after a grand resurfacing, as they're calling it.
Yeah.
Most normal people would say refurbishment.
A refurb.
Refurb.
The loft conversion upstairs in the East Wing.
Some bifolds out the back of the kitchen. But you were there and you went round, saw it all in its kind of majesty and kind of chintzy glory. So what?
Also known as George IV bling.
George IV. Chinese themed bling. So tell us about it, because they've offered up some, they're selling tickets for the first time, 75 quid a pop.
Sound familiar?
Does sound familiar. A bit cheaper than Balmoral.
A little bit cheaper than Balmoral.
Which was £100 to look round.
Yeah. So this is all part of the king's opening up the palaces to the people, bringing the people into the palaces to make them feel they can connect with the institution. And the king is opening up the East Wing for the first time, which is the sort of corridor, effectively, a wing that kind of brought the quadrangle of the palace together when Victoria and Albert felt they needed more space for their ever expanding family. And so they built the East Wing, and they funded it by selling George IV's Royal Pavilion in Brighton, which was his seaside retreat, and filled it with a lot of George IV's acquisitions. And let's just say George IV had a more is more approach to art. So the East Wing, yes, there are some really beautiful paintings by Gainsborough and, you know, traditional state portraits of, George V and Queen Mary. But there's a lot of chinoiserie, is how it was described to us by the curators. George IV had very blingy taste, and you go around and the curators, it was a wonderful tour, because you and I have been into the East Wing a lot. Mm-hmm. We've been into the centre room, that famous room that the balcony is off. And I think we get, as I was saying to someone, a colleague on Tuesday when we went round on the tour, I think we get quite blasé about walking along that corridor, the principal corridor. We don't really take in what we see. We just know we're in the palace for a briefing or a media briefing before a tour. What was wonderful was to walk around and actually see and understand from specialists what we were looking at. And time and again, we were explained that George IV would buy these things, Japanese and Chinese art, beautiful pieces, and then he would upscale them. He would enhance them. He would basically bling them up and put them on sort of huge extra stands. And so it is extremely ornate.
So what was the kind of best stroke worst thing in there?
My favourite piece in there was a very splendid Gainsborough portrait, a portrait made by Gainsborough of a guy called Colonel John St. Ledger. And Colonel John St. Ledger was a great mucker of George IV's. He's a soldier. And it's a beautiful, huge portrait in the principal corridor of this very dashing officer languidly leaning against his horse. I'm afraid there's a horse in there. There is an equine theme to my love of this picture, but it is a stunning picture. And it's just not chinoiserie, which everything else in the East Wing is.
Everything else is.
And the centre room is quite magnificent. And there is a very quirky, ornate...
The kind of lotus chandelier.
Which I think is an acquired taste, Kate.
So they've taken the TV out, haven't they? So as the royal family go out onto the balcony, they've got that TV in the corner where they normally get to see, look out and see all the kind of BBC reports or whatever it is that's going on and see down the Mall.
I think people who come on this tour will love that they can get a glimpse of the famous net curtains that, the Queen and the kids peek through for Trooping the Colour. But also, I think people will be sort of intrigued to see that balcony through the windows, because that balcony has become so, we're going to use a banned word here, iconic. It just has for so many huge national moments. And I think it's, if you're into the royal family, and I think you probably have to be to pay that much money to go around and see the East Wing and the state rooms, I think people will enjoy feeling that they are walking through a part of the palace that is still used by members of the
living
family.
History element of it. Yeah.
And that was actually exactly that. To your point about living history, one of the things the curator said was they found in one of the rooms off the corridor these were like rooms that were used by Queen Victoria's young daughters as princesses. And when they opened up some sort of drawers and went behind sealed up cupboards, they found drawings by the young princesses.
That's fantastic.
Presumably no one has seen since the Victorian era.
It's like those, the Victorian kind of childhood desks and chairs that are still locked away in Balmoral and things like that.
Yeah, it was fascinating, and I think for me, as someone who's become, you and I are quite accustomed to going into Buckingham Palace, I think to understand more of what's in our, in the Royal Collection Trust, which is held on trust for the nation, what belongs to us, what's in there. I think people will love that trip.
But there's also that kind of history element, like you say, to George IV. He has a bit of a checkered history, I think, in the history books. A few weeks after his death, the Times gave the following assessment of him. The truth is that there never was an individual less regretted by his fellow creatures than this deceased king. And I like this quote particular. He is rather too fond of wine and of women. And the person who said that was George himself when he was a Prince Regent.
Well, he had some cracking self-awareness going on there, didn't he?
He acknowledged 3 illegitimate sons, and there's rumours of lots of daughters that he didn't acknowledge. And I commissioned Lucy Bannerman, our brilliant writer at the Times, to go around and look around the East Wing as it opened. And I think pretty fair to say she wasn't a huge fan of it. Talking about the kind of huge tapestries of Asian caricatures that adorn the walls, and saying that it was less Versailles, more the Bournemouth Hotel out of Roald Dahl's The Witches. But there is an element, isn't there? I think if you went around the British Museum and some of this stuff is, like you say, it's been upscaled, or they're kind of European imitations of Asian arts and crafts and caricatures of, Chinese characters, people and things like that. How appropriate is that, do you think?
Well, Lucy picked up on that in her piece, didn't
Absolutely.
she? What would the Japanese emperor recently have thought? And I don't think he would have gone through the East Wing, actually. But if he had, what would he have thought of all that art in there, some of which is, some of which maybe might be a bit overwhelming for him to see. I mean, none of it's sort of derogatory, but it's just, I suppose it just reflects very changing tastes and changing styles, although you could argue that in Buckingham Palace it's sort of stayed the same forever, because actually they've, as part of the resurfacing, they took everything out, conserved a lot of it, but they've put pretty much everything back in.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because I remember when they did it in 2018, they called it decanting.
Yeah.
They said, we're decanting the East Wing, which is normally how you think of wine, you pour it into the decanter, you just pour it out. And so they had over 3,000 artefacts that they decanted out of there, smudged up, did all the electrics, did all the kind of modernising that they needed to do. And now it seems like they've crammed a lot of it back. And was that the right thing to do? I mean, do you think?
I think it would, I suppose, if you hadn't put most of it back in the same place, you'd be completely redecorating, reconfiguring Buckingham Palace, which would probably be a much bigger, more costly exercise. The one thing that has changed was actually the surveyor of the King's works of art, Caroline de Guito, said the one thing she has changed, she has put something else in there. She's put a new clock and a barometer in there that weren't there before. So that's the only thing that's changed.
Why is that?
She felt that where they had been previously, had they been in Windsor? They were somewhere. They weren't at Buckingham Palace, but she felt they never quite sat right where they were. And so, with the King's permission, she asked him, do you mind if I just slightly redecorate here? And he said that's absolutely fine. But I was actually surprised that the King hadn't put more of his own mark in terms of actually, because he's got an eye. He's got a real eye.
Well, that's the thing.
And in Balmoral, we were told that he had changed the curtains and the sofa and the carpet from when the Queen was there.
And he'd brought some of those Prince Albert things out of storage, hadn't he?
He'd bought Prince Albert's. He'd bought a case, display case from upstairs where only he could see it and the family, downstairs so the public could see it as part of the opening up. But he hasn't done that in this, and maybe that's a feeling that he wants to keep Buckingham Palace untouched.
What's the difference between the prices? Why is it £100 to go to Balmoral, do you think, and £75 to go to Buckingham Palace?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to it, because actually you could argue you get even more at Buckingham Palace because you do the East Wing tour as part of the main tour, where you can see the gardens, the state opening, not the state opening, the state rooms opening up as part of the summer opening. So I genuinely don't know the answer to that question.
And you get to see the new portrait of the king?
So I did see that as I was leaving. That you and I talked about this the other day. I had only seen that portrait, the Jonathan Yeo portrait, in the gallery just after it had been
aftermath.
Wallace and Gromited. But it's moved, which of course you wrote about in the Times a while ago. It has moved to the palace until September. It's hanging in the ballroom.
So you get that as part of your £75.
You do. And actually it looks, having seen it in the Philip Moore Gallery and now having seen it hanging in a state room, the scale of that portrait is huge, and it is very red, and so is the ballroom. And so it's a great setting for it.
Oh, it is. I thought you were going to say the reverse.
And it's been lit very well. Uh-huh. But I think, for me, the ongoing question for all of this, the opening up of the palaces and the royal residences, the private ones, the official ones, particularly with the Buckingham Palace, is, Buckingham Palace and the royal household are always very keen to insist that Buckingham Palace remains monarchy HQ, the headquarters of the king and queen, and the working central heartbeat of the monarchy.
A residential palace.
And yet, as I have written and others have too, and it's something that, the palace get quite tetchy about, the king has not spent a night there. And I don't think the king is going to make that his permanent home.
Well, if you think by the time it's finally finished in about 5 years' time and, Camilla's past 80, are they really going to want to up sticks from Clarence House? And it was described to me years ago that they were going to have it as a kind of flat above the shop affair, that, because actually technically it will be a residence, but really their home is Clarence House when they're in London. And I can't see that changing, can you?
It won't change. And the current arrangement works very well, whereby the king, his household is there, his private office is there, the workings of monarchy are there. He goes to Buckingham Palace when he's in London. He holds his audience with diplomats, with prime ministers. He hosts state banquets there. It is, a functioning monarchy HQ. But let's be honest, it's unlikely it's ever going to be his private London residence, despite the official line that Buckingham Palace continued to hold on that. And I think actually the public would be fine with that if people were just honest about it, because he is opening up more. It is going to be open more to the public. And, I've always been a bit bemused that that's still the official line, because I don't think, and you don't think, and most people who do this job don't think that Charles is ever going to live there as his primary London residence.
It's interesting that you talk about the public and it being more open to the public, because of course the public is essentially funding this, is paying for this 369 million resurfacing from the Treasury of Buckingham Palace. A lot of it needed doing. They needed to rip out the asbestos. They needed to
rewire everything.
And it's a long time coming. And the late Queen obviously didn't want to start all that process. Well, in fact, it did start under her reign, but it's going to last for quite some time. And
we're halfway through a 10-year project, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. Replacing all the old boilers, installing new lifts. And I remember going round with the Japanese journalists when we went round during just ahead of the state banquet, and I think a lot of them were quite underwhelmed as we went through the back the back passages with the scaffolding and a kind of peely up lino on the floor and sort of chipped paint and stuff that you see in those kind of back doors. There's still an awful lot to be done. Yeah, but is it going to be value for money? I suppose that's the question, isn't it?
Well, the feeling was when it got that funding 5 years ago or before that that is Buckingham Palace belongs to the nation, and it's important that, and it was in a state of total disrepair, as the Public Accounts Committee sort of found, and they were actually quite cross that it hadn't been resurfaced and refurbished earlier. It's less about being a royal home, I think, Buckingham Palace. It's more about being a monument for the nation, a sort of symbol for the nation, and now somewhere that increasingly the public can go and see much more of, more and more. And I think that's a good move, very good move by the king, but I think he should come clean and fess up and just say, it's unlikely I'm ever going to live here. Maybe I will stand corrected in 5 years' time, Kate. Let's do another podcast when he moves in with his pyjamas and spends the night there.
Well, I think by 5 years' time they won't want to do that. And I can't see William wanting to kind of move in, will they?
No way, never. So what other beats have we been covering this week, Kate?
Well, I think everyone in the country has been something of a sports correspondent, haven't they, lately? As England make it into the finals of the Euro tournament. What a night. I expect you went as wild as Prince William, did you, last night watching that?
I went quite wild. But I tell you, talking about being a sports correspondent, I tell you who else has been a sports correspondent this week, and that's the King.
The King.
Because the message that dropped on our little inboxes last night when that Ollie Watkins had just scored that last minute.
Barely was the ball out of play, and we got this dropping on our phones.
This is what the King said, listeners, which I think would be fair to say took a few of us by surprise because it was what I can only describe as royal bants. So this is what the King said last night, straight after that extraordinary England win. My wife and I join all our family in wishing you the warmest congratulations on reaching the final of the UEFA European Championship and in sending our very best wishes for Sunday's match. If I may encourage you to secure victory before the need for any last-minute wonder goals or another penalties drama, I'm sure the stresses on the nation's collective heart rate and blood pressure would be greatly alleviated. Good luck, England. Charles R.
Never mind God save the King. God save the country's blood pressure.
I mean, that's a royal team talk.
I had to read it twice and I thought, well, was it just a bit of fun? And then I thought, no, that's the official statement. And that was, 10:01 p.m. So that was hardly any time had passed between that dropped. Now, the timing of that, did you think anything of the timing of that and the timing of the Prince of Wales? Because as we know,
hierarchy.
It's the Prince of Wales who is the president of the FA. He's the one who's been to the matches, met the team.
He's the one that does the football bants.
He's the football bants man. And then here it was, the King coming straight in quite quickly.
His Majesty will be going first.
Yes, can you imagine? I thought good on you, Charles, because it was funny. It was to the point. It's what we're all thinking.
Yeah.
And then we've said before, he's not such a massive football fan, but now he's mates with David Beckham. Maybe that's changed. Maybe they're just sitting there having a beer together watching it.
Do you reckon they're WhatsApping during that? Although the King doesn't have a mobile phone, so he probably is. Unless he's doing it on his iPad.
On the iPad.
Yeah.
And he'd be doing it like one index finger at a time, wouldn't he? Maybe not. Maybe he's just dictating it to... Anyway, I thought it was a great message. From the King.
And then we had the Aston Villa fan, the president of the FA, Prince William, super excited that a Villa player had scored that extraordinary goal with his...
Ollie Watkins.
What a beauty, he called it. What a beauty, Ollie. And I think it's fair to say most of us assume His Royal Highness will be in Berlin on Sunday cheering on England.
He's not going to miss that for the world, is he? Maybe a little baby Wales in tow. A little Prince George would be good, wouldn't it?
Great to see Charlotte at the football one day, wouldn't it?
She plays football, doesn't she? They've said that before. She does play football and she's into lots of different sports, so that would be good.
It would be good.
He will surely be there.
Anyway, sticking to sport, Queen Camilla turned up at Wimbledon this week, didn't she, with her sister?
The rather fetching giraffe dress.
Where did we saw that? I think she wore that in Kenya.
Oh, that would make sense.
Yeah.
The Anna Valentine number.
Yes.
She looked like she was having a great time. They were doing a Mexican wave. And it's the first time a Queen's been to Wimbledon since 2010 because the late Queen wasn't such a huge fan. You could probably count on one hand how many times she'd been to Wimbledon. But Camilla's been there quite a few times before anyway, for fun.
Yes.
So it's quite good that she was there. But of course, we're all thinking about Princess of Wales.
Who, of course, is patron of the All England Club and Wimbledon. And we're all waiting to hear whether or not she will be there this weekend. I'm hopeful she will be, Kate. I think it would be nice. Of course, the tradition is that she normally presents the trophies, doesn't she, to the winners. We've got the final, ladies' final on Saturday, men's final on Sunday. I think if she feels up to it in the same way as Drooping, it'd be nice to think she could try and do one day.
You were right last time, so I'm hoping you're right this time. There's another royal Catherine that I always think of with Wimbledon, which I think is a shame because people don't really talk about.
Duchess of Kent.
Is Catherine Kent, Duchess of Kent, who for years from 69 to 2001 awarded the trophies. And if you look back at those pictures in the 80s, she's so glamorous and so wonderful. And the Duke of Kent, of course, the retired president of the All England Club. They were such a glamorous couple. And I think, lest we forget, because she really put in a shift and she's such a brilliant member of the family.
I remember, the thing I most remember about the Duchess of Kent and Wimbledon is that lovely clip when Jana Novotná was runner-up at the Wimbledon final and she lost and she was very emotional and she came to get her runners-up trophy from the Duchess of Kent and she started crying. And the royal family is, back then, I mean, I think this would have been in the 90s. Back then, the royal family wasn't as touchy-feely as some members are now. And Jana Novotná just started crying on centre court and the Duchess of Kent just instinctively hugged her and whispered in her ear. And in the press conference afterwards, when Jana Novotná was asked what the Duchess of Kent said, she said, you played brilliantly. I know that you'll be back, and I know that you will win. And she was right. And Jana Novotná did come back and win. And I always think, you're right, Duchess of Kent is so glamorous, and we don't see her so much anymore. She has a much more quiet private life. But she was incredibly empathetic too in that role, because you are dealing with winners and losers every year when you're going and giving the trophies. So Wimbledon, you're right, it's sort of synonymous with the royal family and the champions every year. So, well, let's see if this weekend we see the Princess of Wales. It would be lovely to see her, but her health comes first, and we've got to respect that.
Absolutely.
The other issue that William's been focusing on this week, as well as football, and I suspect football has been very high on his priority list this week, is homelessness. And it's been 1 year since he launched Homewards, his initiative to try and tackle homelessness in 6 key locations across the UK. And it's been a real focus for him. The teams that he's assembled in all those locations and working from the Royal Foundation have been convening and getting people together. It's been the focus of the first year, getting people together. And today he was down in Brixton at an event there, meeting some of the people who have been working with him in the Royal Foundation, and some of the people who experience homelessness over the years, who've turned their lives around and who've got involved in the Homewards project. And I was down there and sort of met a few of them, and there were some extraordinary life stories there, actually, and some hopeful stories. And I think one of the things that William is always very keen to focus on, and we've heard this from Earthshot, haven't we, is being an optimist and being hopeful. He acknowledges that it's a huge, very difficult issue that's faced by too many people. And you and I went to a briefing on Monday where, one of the people he's working with from Crisis said, absolutely, the figures are getting worse. So this challenge is
going in the wrong direction.
They are going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
It's getting harder. But what was interesting to hear from William today, and he gave a speech at Brixton at this event, was the focus for him is as much as sort of tackling the numbers in these 6 locations and getting, partnerships from organisations together who've never spoken to each other before, is this idea of changing the narrative. And he said in his speech that I created Homewards because I wanted us to look at the issue of homelessness through a different lens. And that came up last weekend because we got the news that he is going to be involved in launching a new exhibition at the Saatchi Gallery in London over the summer, which will feature works from famous artists like the photographer Rankin, but also much less famous artists and a lot of people wouldn't have heard of, who will create artworks that will go in this exhibition that will be about their lived experience of homelessness. And one of those is Dave Martin, who is the Big Issue vendor that William has gone out on the streets with and sold the Big Issue with twice. Yeah. So for the Prince, and he's going to take part in this new ITV documentary in the autumn, I think we get this sort of feeling from his work that changing people's sort of preconceptions about homelessness, focusing on answering homelessness, is as important to him as actually getting the numbers down too.
Yeah, absolutely. He's talking about changing the narrative, isn't he?
Yeah.
This documentary, I think, will be interesting in the autumn. So this is the 2-part, 60-minute episodes for ITV.
It's got a bold title, hasn't it?
What's the title?
William, We Can Solve Homelessness.
Oh, yeah. A lot to live up to.
Well, it's a big old bold
title. But as he said today, I truly believe we can end homelessness. And I think what's interesting that they're doing with this, with all the Royal Foundation stuff, is this preventative element. Because how depressing to be a member of the royal family, to go around and see all these problems in society, to try to solve them, or to try to get charitable funding to solve all these problems of society, when you must always be thinking, well, can we just stop it happening in the first place, which is exactly what he wants to do with Homewards. And at first I was pretty cynical because, how can bloke with so many palaces really kind of lecture us on, homelessness today, and what is he doing about it when he has all these homes that he helicopters in between. But you look at the convening power of the events today, people like, he's got IKEA, he's got Homebase, he's got Freshfields, the law firm, he's got Knight Frank, he's got all these huge names now together, and everybody wants to meet Prince William, but then he's also kind of bringing people with these lived experience of homelessness, like this amazing Dr. Sabrina Cohen-Hatton that we want to get on the podcast. I was speaking to her on Times Radio. She's unbelievably inspirational. She lived on the streets as a teenager and somehow managed to get not just a degree, a PhD, rose through the ranks of the fire service after joining as a firefighter at 18. and is now kind of inspiring kind of national policy on how people fight fights. She's just incredible. But so many people like that who are advocates for his scheme, I think it is going to be a success.
We heard today as well, after that event in Brixton, that there was an announcement earlier this year, and I wrote a story in February that he was building social housing on Duchy of Cornwall land in
Yes, that was a good
Cornwall,
story. That was a good story.
Because I got him to say that in the interview last year when I said, "Oh, you've got all these."
Well, you sort of said, "What are you doing about it?" Which is a great question.
And there was a sort of pause, and I was like, "So there's going to be no affordable housing on your land then?" And he sort of shifted uncomfortably in his seat and went, "Well, no, but I'm going to do some social housing." And then the press secretary shifted even more uncomfortably in his seat. But then he did it, and in February, they started building in Cornwall and Lansland, and today they've said that he's involved in a lot more plans on Duchy of Cornwall. So there will be more social housing built for people at risk of homelessness on his land. And that can only be a good thing, because that, of course, he said last year, I know people are going to say to me, who are you to talk about homelessness with, exactly as you said, all these houses and palaces? But either you do nothing or you try and do something.
And also I think that this element with the kind of Royal Foundation as well, this idea of they're preventing it. But I said to them on Monday at the briefing, well, why is it a 5-year programme?
Yeah.
What, you really think you're going to, job done and walk away in 5 years? But the answer to that was really interesting, which was that, no, we want to put those sort of trial areas, those 6 trial areas, put the processes in place so that they can then manage it. This sustainable pattern, because I think that's what they saw with the King when he was Prince of Wales, that he had squillions of charities that he set up, and then obviously had a long time until he got to the throne. It was all fine until he was nearing the throne and thinking, what am I going to do with all these charities? They're going to have to start standing on their own feet. Whereas William now is perhaps being more realistic, perhaps because of the situation that he's in with 75-year-old father on the throne, knowing that he's the heir. This has to be work that can be sustainable, that you can start a project, put all the framework in place, but then people run it themselves. And I think that is a smart idea. That's a really clever idea.
Is it coming? Do you know what we really wanted William to say today, which he just staunchly refused to? It's coming homewards.
It's coming homewards. Gosh, he missed a trick, didn't he, there? But he did say his voice was hoarse from all the shouting, cheering England on, didn't he?
Dale and Skinner should do an anthem for his homelessness project. It's coming homewards.
Coming homewards. Yeah.
I hope it is, Kate. I hope when we next record.
Oh, let's be sitting here next week and with a win. Yes. Come on.
Come on.
It's happening.
King Harry Kane.